Today you're going to discover how to truly master your emotions. Now, you may have heard of emotional intelligence before, and maybe even have some understanding of its importance. Being in charge of your emotions is vital for success and happiness in relationships, but not in the way you think. By having top-level EI, you'll become completely unreactive to her tests. You'll eradicate all neediness and anxiety that's pushing her away. And by the power of your confident feeling in yourself, you'll make her feel certain that you are the man. However, if you fail to understand the role of your emotions, how to properly use them, they will guide your life day in, day out, making you a passenger of your past trauma, doomed to repeat the heartbreak, isolation, destined for those too ignorant to master them. And listen, people out there will tell you that simple information how to master your emotions using the 7 tips for emotional intelligence is good enough. It's not, and it never will be. That's why at the end of this video, I'm gonna give you actionable steps to take to slowly gain control of not just your emotions, but your whole entire being that I've been using with clients for thousands of hours, my past decade of a licensed therapist. All right, let's first discuss the role of emotions. What are emotions? I mean, I'm sure you have a basic understanding of what they are, but I can go in so many different directions about what they are. But from the most fundamental first principles perspective, emotions simply are energy in motion. If you look at it from a very, not empiricist or rational, but very spiritual perspective and even metaphysical, if you look at matter, like something like this recorder that I'm using, feels hard, right? Feels solid, but at the end of the day, when you look down in a microscope, you'll see that all the little electrons and atoms are just empty space. There's no actually hard matter. And so every emotion has a vibrational frequency to it, and they all have specific desires or intentions to help you survive. They are adaptive, energetic outputs to help you gain things for survival or to remove threats out of the way. Okay, that's what I want you to think about. And I'll give you a client story example in a second, but I just want to say first also, they are signposts for survival. All right, so let's look at an example of someone having anxiety, right? Let's say you text your wife and you know that she's feeling a little distant. And normally she will call you back or text you back within an hour max throughout your whole relationship. And you already know that she's becoming more distant. She said something, she's wanting to go on girls trips, she's doing all this stuff. And so your survival brain is like, oh my gosh, she's gonna abandon me. And your survival brain, the center of emotion, the thalamus and the amygdala, where all that emotion stems from, it's gonna perceive a threat that your wife or girlfriend is abandoning you. She's gonna leave you. And as we were evolving, that oftentimes meant for a man, not full death, but like abandonment was very, very traumatic, more than it is now, because we're so much more connected now, but your brain can't tell the difference between that old software and things now. So it gives you the same physiological response, right? Just like if you were to see a tiger or a bear or like something that actually threatened your survival, that same flight or fight response is happening when your wife doesn't text you back. I know consciously it's not the same, but your subconscious brain can't tell the difference, right? So when your wife doesn't text you back after an hour or two, it's like, oh my gosh, threat, anxiety. Now that anxiety, as much as you don't like it, it's not a pleasant experience, it's more of a net negative in your mind because you're judging it, which we'll get to later on, that you shouldn't do. But what happens is that anxiety actually is adaptive for your survival. Meaning that anxiety it gives you a lot of energy, right? You think of something like an anxious person, they're moving with energy. They want to do something, right? They want to go take action. Whereas someone who's more depressive, it's like the deactivation of energy. It's like more like, okay, like depression's like depress inward, like protect yourself, like push away the world. Where anxiety is like go chase, go after, right? And so even these negative emotions, they have their own positive benefits. And you must understand that because a lot of the emotional ignorance, so the opposite of intelligence, is a lot of people think that, oh, these emotions are bad, anger, frustration, shame, guilt, and we gotta get rid of them, right? And you learn that early from childhood, and our society teaches that. But when you can change that perspective and think, oh, every emotion has a positive intention behind it. You stop judging the emotion. So what happens with the anxious person is that you stop becoming anxious about your anxiety. Anxiety squared is like more anxiety, right? Exponential anxiety. So the first step in understanding emotional intelligence And using your emotions to your own power and becoming a master of your emotions, not letting them control you, is to understand they have positive benefits. So when the anxiety comes, it's like, instead of being like, oh no, I'm anxious, what do I do? How do I get rid of this anxiety? Oh my God, she's not texting me back. You say, oh wow, I'm anxious right now. Huh, okay. What does this anxiety want? You separate yourself from it. You see that? Like, what does this anxiety want? Not my anxiety. I'm not identifying with it, but what does the anxiety want right now? Okay. It wants me to go do this thing. Is that advantageous? Is there a different way to go about this? And creating that space, as you'll see, is one of the primary skills in cultivating that emotional intellect. And you see, most times what happens is that you can't control that elephant. You know, if it's chill, it's fine, right? There's nothing going on. But if something triggers that elephant and it wants to take control, it is going to take control. And you have no control over that elephant, over your emotions. If it wants to take over, you're just there for the ride and you're trying to hold on tight, right? This is why so many guys, when their wife finally decides to leave them, they become emotional wrecks. Of course they do, right? That elephant is taking control. They're like, oh my God, I'm gonna die. And even though logically you know your wife leaving you or your girlfriend leaving you, you logically know you'll survive. Logically. But here, it doesn't feel that way, right? And if you were to, I'll teach you this at the very end as well, if you were to sit down and really talk to that part of yourself and see that part of yourself, visualize those emotions, embody it, see it as part of you, and listen to it, it'll tell you we're gonna die. That's thousands and thousands of years of evolution, right? The same feeling of anxiety of seeing that tiger in the trees about ready to pounce on you, and you get that is the same emotion you experience when she doesn't text you back, when she says, I'm done, I'm no longer in love with you. You go into that fight or freeze. That elephant is just running around and you're panicking. But in those moments, like we talked about, you're not gonna do what's best for you, right? It's gonna be paradoxical, you're gonna do the wrong things. So the question remains, how do we start to control our emotions? Well, I wanna start with one of my favorite quotes when it comes to emotions. Viktor Frankl wrote the book, The Man's Search for Meaning. He was a Holocaust survivor and a psychologist. He wrote his own logotherapy modality of psychology. Point being, his quote really accurately sums up the power of emotions have and how we gain control over them. He said, between every stimulus and response, there's a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. I want you to take that quote and I want you to replace stimulus and response with emotion and action. And every habitual emotional pattern you have of anxiety, of neediness, of depression, of whatever the case may be, it is a learned pattern. It is just, you've felt abandoned by your mother at this time, you responded immediately, it got you your need. Is needily a word? I think it might be. I don't know. I made it up, trademark. What I'm trying to make is that there is no space a lot of times with your emotions and your actions. Elephant gets triggered, you have no control. Wife doesn't text you back, wife talks to another guy, wife says this thing about you, wife criticizes you, react, no space. And over time, those habitual responses create who you are as a person. You become an unreactive man. And so the goal here is, how do we increase that space between stimulus and response, and between emotion and action? Because in that space, you start to take new actions. And with new actions, it becomes a new self. As an example, I remember this for myself. As some of you may know in this channel, I've been cheated on in my first 2 relationships. It really guided who I was and what I did in relationships and caused me to go into psychology in the first place, get my master's. But a lot of being traumatically abandoned by the woman I loved, is I had this trauma response and this immediate reaction to anything I saw in my reality that said, oh my God, warning flag, she's gonna abandon you for another guy. And I remember I was dating one of my ex-girlfriends, and she was telling me about how she was talking to some other guy on Instagram, and he had so much in common with her, and he was into all these spiritual things, doing all this stuff, and like I felt that like elephant starting to round around, right? It was getting like, oh crap, like take the, I don't even know what I'm trying to say. Like, I had no reins, right? I started to feel the emotion. But from doing these actions I'm about to teach you, I created more of a space. I noticed that I was having that reaction, that the elephant was getting out of control. And so my go-to response, I know, for me was to really abandon her, to go to another girl, to ignore her, to be avoidant, right? That was my pattern. Instead, I caught myself. And then I chose something different. I said to her, I said, hey, I recognize that I'm feeling a little bit insecure about this. And even though it's hard for me to be vulnerable about this, I just wanted to tell you. And that went completely against who I was, against every emotion inside of me. Was like, no, don't say it, right? Think of how many men are like, don't be vulnerable with a woman, don't show her your emotions. That's a learned pattern because of their trauma. But in that moment, she looked at me, paused, she thanked me, and she said,
wow, Josh, like that took a lot of courage. He's gay, so I just want to let you know that.
And imagine if I didn't do that. Imagine if I didn't take that space, I would have destroyed a relationship based off of a fear and a delusion that wasn't true. Something else created in my mind. And it may not be that straightforward and obvious for you, or it may be, but you don't recognize how often these, what I call these samskaras, these emotional karmas, how much weight they have over your life and how much they're actually creating pain for you. That elephant has been guiding you in the wrong direction so many times. So what do we do about it? Do a favor for me right now. Let's take a breath together. Just close your eyes 1 second. In your nose. Out your mouth. Start to notice how you feel in your body, because your body and its physical sensations are connected to how you feel. A lot of the emotions will manifest in our body. I know for me, when I was growing up, anxiety showed up for me in my stomach. I played soccer games, and I remember before every soccer game, I had to rush to the bathroom. It was always just like a ritual, like all this anxiety built up for the game, like a performance-based anxiety, and I just had to run to the bathroom, and I had to, I was in that fight or flight mode. But awareness is one of the key factors in also producing this emotional intellect, mastering those emotions. And so often you're caught up in this thing, right? All your attention and energy is focused on a small part of your body. And in our Western society, we think a lot, right? We put an over amount of emphasis and competence and attention into the use of our brains. And the brain is one of the most important parts of your body, absolutely. But we often neglect how other parts of our body feel, right? And this will kind of like override everything else. But there is a higher intelligence in your body, in your guts, in your heart, in other parts of your body as well, that you can tap into and gain insight from. And one of the ways to do this is that when you're feeling emotions, it's to be aware and attuned to how the rest of your body feels. Because when you can put energy and attention into your stomach, into your heart, you will get a different signal. You'll have a different message. I would even argue a more true message, because this can trick you, can it? This can often trick you. There's a lot of new software going on, and your perceptions will often influence, as we talked about, the way actually things are. But I believe that tapping into other parts of your body, there's where the actual energy is, where the feeling is, you will get a different message that is more aligned with truth. And when you can operate from that place of truth, you know how to better operate in the outside world, to learn, to grow, to heal, to love. And a lot of it also starts with your breath. A breath is a big trigger on how we feel. Your breath will, if you're feeling anxious, for example, your breath will be more short and shallow. And if you start to breathe more short and shallow, you'll get more anxious. It's one of those things where I told you to laugh and smile for 30 seconds, even though it's so stupid, it makes you happier. Studies will show that, right? And I remember one of the most anxious moments of my life, if not it is the most anxious moment of my life. Probably number 2. But I was almost kicked out of grad school. I had to go to a court case, long story, I could save for another video. I won, I was proven right. The professor was wrong, and I was actually able to graduate. Long story, I could save for another time. But I remember sitting there in that courtroom of my fellow students and professors that were the jury members. We didn't know them. And I was aware that my breath was like, I was like having a panic attack almost. And when you can, in those moments with your partner, when you're upset, when you're frustrated, your chest tightens. The blood is flowing to your limbs. You avoid eye contact. You start to breathe more shallow. But the beautiful thing about your breath, it's one of the few actions or processes or happenings in our body that you can't control and goes on without you. You're not aware of your breath 99% of the time, but you can't control it. And with that level of autonomy and control, you can also control your emotions. It's something so simple, isn't it? But the simplest things we tend to forget. And we need to be reminded. And when you can, once a day, practice that control of your breath, you become more mindful of how you're breathing throughout the day. There's a book by James Nestor, I believe, called Breath or Breathe. And I can summarize the whole book for you. Breathe in your nose and out your mouth. Studies will show that it's just so more advantageous. There's even people right now that are like putting tape over their mouth when they go to sleep so they can only breathe in their nose. For me, it's a little too much, but breathe in your nose. And what will happen is that you'll start to calm down, you'll start to feel differently. And then when you feel differently, perceptions of the things will change as well. Because as we already previously stated, so many people are unaware of how their emotions are guiding their perceptions and how the perceptions are creating their emotions, this circular effect. So in the example of your wife or girlfriend pulling away, or she's going at you saying, you're a horrible person, how could you do this to me for all those years? You're a scumbag, like you deserve this. Obviously we can tell where her emotions are at, can't we? And no matter what you do, no matter what you say, it goes through the filter of her emotions. You could show her all the positive changes and she will see those positive changes and she'll say, you're being manipulative, because she feels a certain way toward you. And we cannot control her emotions. We can influence, but we cannot control. So all you can do is manage your own emotions. That when she is being that way, you don't have to let her poison, her energy, infect you and you fall into her frame. One of the best ways to do this is to be in control of your emotions. And the best way to be in control of your emotions is to be aware of your breath and be aware of the perceptions you are having, right? Like, oh shoot, I feel anxious right now, I feel under attack. Pause, breathe. How am I seeing this? How would an apex male, how would a higher value man see this situation? What would he do? Creating that space between the stimulus and the response, between the emotion and the action, that's cultivating a new man, that space. It's creating new neurons, it's firing into new habits. New habits create a new destiny for yourself, don't they? So, come back to your breath. It's gonna be okay, isn't it? Everything you've gone through, everything you will go through, Big Josh says it's gonna be all right. It is. And I know maybe for some of you that are going through this who are feeling that anxiety, feeling that shame or guilt, or it's hard to hear that. You don't want to believe that because that's not how you feel, is it? So if you didn't like what I just said, that it's gonna be okay, you're like, no, it's not. Yeah, that's how you feel. That's fine, you could feel that way. It's still gonna be okay. But if you take a few seconds to just breathe with me, you start to change the perceptions of the things. So let's go into practical examples because I get very esoteric with you on the channel, don't I? But understanding these giant concepts allows you to kind of autocorrect all the micro behaviors, and your compulsion to get every single word to, what do I say here? What do I do? What do I do? What do I do? Your focus on the micro, right? And I'm trying to teach you the macro. I'm trying to give you that fish, teach you how to fish, right? Instead of give you the fish constantly, which I do on this channel. But let's go to a little bit more micro. So let's look at an example of anxiety. Go back to that texting thing I said earlier. Your wife doesn't text you back. It's been an hour or 2 or 3 or 4, maybe even a day because she's moved out or whatever. The anxiety in you starts to create a story, a narrative. Oh shoot, is she seeing someone else? Does she not love me anymore? Is she looking at my message and actually just ignoring it? She's falling out of love with me. Maybe she even said she was out of love with you, so that makes it even worse, doesn't it? But let's pause and say, how are you perceiving this? And is there a new perception we can adopt from a calm state that is more advantageous toward what you want? Because when you're in the state of anxiety, you're focused on what you don't want, what you're afraid of, what you're pushing away, right? And that fear and what you focus on will just manifest and create more fear, right? If you respond to her and you send her a freaking lecture on how you're so sorry about what you've done, and you realize now that you were, hurting her for all these years and all this stuff, and then you're just sorry, you're sorry. That's low value. It's low value, right? The apex male will Say, okay, she's not responding to me. She's playing hard to get. She's testing me to see if I will react. So instead, I can choose not to say anything back to her, let her come to me, or I can craft a simple message saying, hey, seems like you're busy. I'm here to talk whenever you're ready. And then you continue on with your day. As much as that goes against the way you feel in that moment, over time, those actions will then create more of the feeling inside you, okay? So it all starts with your perception. Change your perception, you change your life. And that perception is changed with being aware of how you feel. And this is a habit you can cultivate. Most people live on autopilot, right? The amount of emotions to actions, it's compulsory. It's almost an addiction sometimes for some people. They're emotionally addicted to these emotions because they've been so trained and used to just having this response since childhood, like, oh, my mom is leaving me. Anxious, right? Go after her, chase. I'm not used to this amount of distance from the one I love. I just feel alone. I can't be alone. I need to be with someone. I can't just be by myself, right? This is something that you've been trained to respond that way over the years. And your emotions will keep you in that frame because to break out of that is ego death. To break out of those emotional habits. It's painful. As much as it's not to make you happy, your emotions are not designed to keep you happy. Your emotions are designed to keep you alive. And if that anxious reaction was a way to keep you alive, you're gonna keep on doing it. It's time to change that story, okay? It's because it comes from these nice guy tendencies. So if you wanna watch a video right here on these nice guy tendencies that you can also overcome, I'll click on that. You can set up a free call with me and my team down below if you are committed and need help to get her back in your life. Make sure you are fully committed to getting her back, and I love you. I'll see you in the next one.